teachers of Reddit, what is the weirdest excuse you've ever heard that turned out to be true? We had a kid in our class who was pure chaos. Came late all the time, forgot stuff, didn't do his homework, disruptive in class. You get the picture. One day he came to school over 2 hours late and said the bus he was on fell into a sinkhole. Everybody was like, yeah, right, until the news came in that there had indeed been a sinkhole from a tunnel construction, and that indeed a bus had slipped into it. We never found out whether our classmate had actually been in it, but he swore he was. I had a 6th grader come into class very sleepy during test day. I asked her why, and she said she is sleeping next to her dead grandma in the living room, and has been too scared to sleep. I asked her parents about this. Turns out it's a cultural practice of theirs to keep the dead relative in the home for a few days, while their spirit makes its journey to the afterlife. To answer some of your questions, she was from a large Hmong family that lived in a small apartment. She also mentioned before the grandmother passed, her family attached bells to the grandmother's clothing to scare away the spirits that were making her sick. Me, the teacher, didn't make cookies for the last day of school before finals as promised, because a car drove into my house and they cut off my gas line to check for leaks. I pulled up the local news article as evidence. My cousin took my homework on vacation to Venezuela. My pet rats dragged my history homework into their cage and modified it to fit in with the aesthetic of their shredded paper nest. I told the teacher the next day, who didn't believe me until I could get my dad to vouch for me. Teach was, oh well, if she wasn't lying, why didn't she bring the remainder in as proof? My dad, because the papers were shredded and covered in rat urine.
N.
I've had a few. He'll be 2 weeks late for class because he'll be in Beijing at the Olympics. My father was murdered. I was deported last night. Funny story about the last excuse. One day, this great guy in my PE class completely disappears for like half the year. Nobody could reach him. He wasn't responding to any phones, messages, DMs, etc. And part of his family was gone too. Even the teachers were puzzled and worried. So he comes back sometime later, and we all joke around about how he was deported. Well, turns out he actually did get deported. For some reason, they mistook his family for illegal immigrants and detained them for a month, then sent them to the Dominican. His family was half Puerto Rican, half Mexican, so it made no sense why they were sent to the doctor, and at the very least, he himself was also a U.S. citizen. His family filed to go back to the USA immediately. I was a student. It was the first day of school. There were 6 of us who were late. The reason, the school bus stop was moved to a new location. We all piled into my mother's car. We went to the principal's office. The office manager said notice letters were sent to us, so she checked her log. The notices were never sent out. My bio teacher told me this story. During a biology lesson they were outside. My school is near a small lake. A student ended up falling in and getting their legs stuck in the mud. The bio teacher had to rescue them and hose them off behind the school. The next period teacher didn't believe them despite the student being soaking wet. I didn't come to school because I was in Mexico at my hypnotist. Yeah, didn't think one would take a day trip to Mexico for a hypnotist and be back the next day, but that was in fact what had happened.
N.
Not a teacher, but I'm from a small town, and one day like half of my high school was late because a senior decided on his last day he was going to ride his ride on Lawnmower to school in cut-off Daisy Dukes and a cowboy hat. There's one main access road to the school. He backed shoot up for like half an hour between buses and cars. You won't be surprised to know that he goes by the nickname Bubba. One of the girls I know from uni works in a college here. College is a name for vocational school, and one of her groups of students jokingly said they died when someone was absent from classes. So one day it went morbidly wrong. When she asked why, say, Dave was absent, the group replied that he died. She laughed and said okay, but seriously, and the class was just silent. Edit. For additional clarity, yes, it turned out that Dave was dead. For real this time. Very dead. I had a student miss class because one of his co-workers at his job had been arrested for child pornography and management needed him to cover the shift the guy was supposed to work before he was arrested. The student brought in proof too, thankfully not in the form of CP. I gave this one. I was in college. I went back to my house between classes, only to find my roommates barricaded inside by police. Why, you might ask? There was a bull moose in our side yard in the fish and game people were very concerned. So my lab isn't until 3 or something, and meanwhile there's like 8 officers having a standoff with a moose in my yard. This continues until someone decides that the moose is an imminent threat and they are going to try to tranquilize it. So they try that and it fails. So now they are going to kill the moose. It gets to be about 2:45 and I need to leave for my class, and I'm summarily informed by the armed officer that my lawn is not safe and I'm to stay inside. So I emailed my prof and was like, look, I know you're not going to believe this, but I'm barricaded in my house and they won't let me leave. I assume this will be on the news tonight. Turns out it was on the news. They interviewed me and I got an exemption on that lab. He told me later that he was going to 100% fail me because it was the worst excuse ever until he saw the news story. In case it wasn't immediately obvious, yes, this occurred in Vermont, because where else would this be a problem? As a graduate for undergrad students, I was teaching an online course and all assignments had to be submitted by midnight. A student emailed me, this is important, and said her internet was down and she couldn't submit the paper. As in logged into her email on the internet to email me that her internet was down. The way the class was run, if she didn't submit the paper by midnight she got a 0 for the assignment. I replied to her email, remember, her internet is down, that if she brought me a hard copy of the paper she could still get a grade. She shows up at my apartment 10 minutes later. I hosted study groups in the community room with her hard copy paper and a half melted internet router. She had emailed me from her smartphone that she had for her internship. This was early in the smartphone surge and few people had them. Girl got her grade and was still in touch. She proved herself to be an incredibly dedicated student and is now in graduate school herself. I had a student who told me he was going to miss one of the exams because he was visiting a famous rapper in Florida with his family. He told me that the rapper, who at the time was a relatively big deal all over the radio, was his cousin and his family was flying out for a show and he couldn't skip it. I mean, I would have let him make up the exam anyway. I don't really care as long as he takes it. But all his peers and I were kind of like, yeah, right. Okay, whatever you say, man. He was telling the truth. When he got back from Florida, said famous rapper Skyped into our poetry class and chatted with my students about poetry and lyrics and such. It was actually really cool. I told a teacher I was late because a car hit and ran me on my bike and propelled me into a ditch, but that I was fine. She only believed me because, coincidentally, her boyfriend was my bike mechanic, which I knew. Small town, and he confirmed for her that my bike had most definitely been damaged in a manner consistent with my story. Not a teacher, but a fellow student in my grad program last week. Sorry, I have to go. I just got a notification that my TV fell on my cat. One time my teacher's dog ate my homework. Since she thought it was unfair for me to redo a long assignment, she gave me full credit based on the benefit of the doubt. Not me, but a friend. Substitute teaching for a day. Walks into class, hi, I'm your teacher for the day. I'm told you have homework, can you hand it in now please? Student raises hand, I don't have my homework, teacher. And why is that? Student, we weren't given homework, teacher. Oh yes you were. Student, nope. Teacher gets angry about how she knows they were given homework and just because she was a new teacher didn't mean that they can walk over her. Different teacher walks in. Turned out the sub teacher was in the wrong classroom. Not a teacher, but my dog literally ate my homework in high school. I had to read The Great Gatsby in English, and I remember my teacher asking me where my copy of the book was. I told him my dog ate it, and he gave me that. Really, bro, look. Took out the completely destroyed copy, and the expression on his face when he realized I wasn't lying was priceless. I was the student my friend had to use for an excuse. So me and my best friend had a project due in science, and my mom went into labor about 4 that morning. I spent the day at the hospital, not school, when the teacher yelled at him for not having the project because it was on my computer. He just said to her nonchalantly, his mom is in labor, it's on his computer. I was told the look on her face was priceless. I was looking through the assignments that students handed in, and I noticed that one was missing. I talked to the student and asked him why he didn't have his homework, and he said, "My dog ate it." I asked him, "Really?" And he stared at me with a straight face, so I called his mother. It turns out that his dog actually did eat his homework. Alright, this only barely applies because I didn't hear it directly, but it's a fun story, so I'm going to tell it anyway. There was a teacher who taught college English as a second language classes. She had a student who asked if he could have an extension on his paper. She declined. Turns out, his family living in another country was imprisoned because his dad was a journalist who wrote a scathing article about the current regime. He missed class for a few days, during which he flew to his home country, rescued his mom and sister from prison, and flew them back. And he still turned in the paper on time. A student asked a fellow instructor if he could go home on leave because his dog died. The instructor told him no, and gave him the generic speech on how he'd miss a lot of things in the military during his career, yada yada. The student had a meltdown and was sent to task to our boss, a master chief, and explained the full story. Apparently this guy's parents and siblings all died several years before in an auto accident, and the dog was his only remaining family. He lived with other relatives afterward, but still. The chain of command followed up on the story. It was true, and we sent him home on leave. We started using that as a cautionary tale for new instructors, telling them to be sympathetic when mentoring a student, because you never know what they've been through, and a little empathy can make a big difference. Obligatory, not a teacher but someone I went to school with who was late a lot, came in one day talking about how he was watching the news. Yeah right, David. And why exactly were you watching the news? Some plane had just flown into a building in New York. My "where were you" moment is sitting in social studies class listening to a kid tell the most obvious lie he had ever told, only for it to be the truth. When I was a HS student, we had classwork and homework on the first day. My teacher claimed to have never received them from me, and I was like, "Look, street the attendance, I was there, wouldn't you remember someone not doing their work on the first day?" She just said she didn't have it, despite people who don't even like me vouching for me. I redid the assignments, and 3 months later she returned my original assignments by having kids pass it to me. I sat at the back. She never apologized or anything. Also not a teacher, sorry, but one time, while cycling to school, my sister's school bag fell off and into a creek, and I went wading into the water to get it out. Arrived in class with no shoes and wet socks and pants drained to my knees, but the teacher straight up didn't believe me anyway. My friend got his 2 front teeth knocked out while play fighting with his dad, and the teacher called him a liar in front of the class and then had to apologize to him, his dad, and the whole class the next day. I have a cousin who went to his math class and turned in his homework without any proof showing he worked on the problem. When asked why he didn't show his work, he responded with, "A NASA rocket scientist showed me a better way." Well, no one believes him until they called his dad, and he had to explain they had a family friend from out of town staying at their house, and yes, he was actually a NASA rocket scientist. Not a teacher, but I got a frog stuck in my printer just before I was going to print an assignment. This was before email submitted assignments were standard. Got an extra day because the professor had never gotten that excuse. Also, HP sent me a new printer. I'm not a teacher, but I once arrived late to class because I had walked on some fresh cement and my right leg went knee deep inside. I had to go back home and wash everything up quickly with a lot of water. The secretary cracked up when I told her what happened. I specifically remember one time my dog actually ate my sister's homework, and she brought in pieces of the shredded homework. My mom even caught the dog in the act and got pictures of him.